Stop the cap.
Getting backed up again. You know what really irritates me? I should say pisses me off, but it's just a slight irritation because I expect it now. And it's the anti-blackness in archaeology. Of all things, right? Archaeology, right? Talk about some nerd shit, right? But I've always had a fascination with the idea of the ancient world. And I think it started with religion and how much religion didn't make any sense to me. Is oh, and there was Adam and Eve, and you see these pictures of white Adam and Eve, and I'm like, okay, so they fucked each other, and then they had a baby, and then okay, who's the baby fucking? Like this is my brain as a child, right? I'm sitting in church, and you got a white Jesus on the wall, and oh, he died for our sins. Right. And then I'm like, well, why does he look white? Isn't he supposed to be Middle Eastern? Like, isn't he supposed to look like the dude Ahmed that, works at the bodega? Right? People say, well, didn't you grow up in the suburbs? Now, when I was young, my parents had to go to work, and I used to stay with my great grandparents in what was that? North Philly? Was that North Philly? Was it North Philly or was it West Philly? No, it was what? No, it was North Philly. It was North Philly. Yeah. So anyway, used to stay with them, and why did I bring that point up? Talking about me going blank. Oh yeah, yeah. So, like the bodega and the little stores and stuff like that. I remember, just little bits and pieces and going to church and hearing the stories of Jesus because I came from. But what's funny is there are people or were people in my family that were a part of the Nation of Islam. And then there were also people who started off in Christianity. I don't know what happened, in my family, especially on my mother's side. Like I don't know where the shit like fractured, in terms of people like just not really being into religion. Like everybody just kind of could go in the direction. Nobody really gave a fuck. They didn't force it on anybody else. It's just weird because my own parents, they never forced it on me. It just didn't. I don't know. Maybe I just come from a family of thinkers. I don't know. We just never got down with it like that. We just kind of went through the motions. You know, uh, you know, going to church to appease other family members and stuff like that. But at some point, I think my parents just gave up on it. They're like, yeah, we ain't dealing with it. I tried to dabble with it in my teenage years. I went back and I got invited a couple times when I would come across people who, oh, you don't go to church? Oh my God. They were trying to convert me. Even some white people. I went to some white people's churches. This white lady who lived down the street, and she wanted me to go to church with her. And, I went to church. I didn't feel it. I never felt the Holy Spirit and nothing. I just didn't feel it. It was spookyism to me. It was just weird. But I'm saying, long story short, that whole the earth is 6,000 years old and God came down, and there was Noah and it flooded the world and I'm not even saying that there wasn't a cataclysm or there wasn't a great flood, but I'm saying the timeline was always just fucked up for me. I'm like, this don't make no sense. Then you get into like some real like like archaeology. You get into some real archaeology, and then it turns into uh you get the real timelines of humanity, right? You get the okay, modern humans are 300,000 years old, right? That's just their guesstimate, right? Then they find like something they found like it was some wooden structure in Africa. They found some wooden structure and they carbon dated it. And then they were like, "Oh, this is like 400,000 years old." So they had to add like another 100,000 years. But anyway, for the most part, people say 300,000 years. And it's like, I'm like, do you have any idea how much time that is? Like people are, they really, they have like such a hard time with this. And it's like I feel like a lot of people's brains are split because a lot of people, they want to call themselves Christian and they believe and all this other shit, right? And so you only get this, the Earth was built in 7 days or created in 7 days, and it was 6,000 years old, and that's as far back as we go. And I'm like, but modern human beings are 300,000 years old. Africans 300,000 years old, right? And that's without going even further back than that, diving into like, you know, Cro-Magnon and Homo habilis and all that shit, right? We're just talking modern humans. So we're just gonna make the cut off 300,000 years. It's like when people talk about Cleopatra and they don't realize that Cleopatra, whether it's her birth or her death, is closer to us today than she was to the creation of the first pyramids. To hell, even the creation of the Pyramid of Giza, if I'm saying if that's dated correctly, because the first pyramid was the Pyramid of Djoser, which is a step pyramid. Like there's many pyramids. There's like the red pyramid, and there's the bent pyramid. There's all type of pyramids. There's pyramids that are like crumbling like into the Nile because rivers move and shit like that. Like it's like partially flooded. There's all type of pyramids that you never see. There's a pyramid where like all the sides like have crumbled, and then it's like this like center like square block in the middle. Like there's all type of pyramids that people don't like. It's like, oh, it's only the Great Pyramid of Giza. Like no, there's tons of pyramids that were built at all different various times. Like ancient Egypt is a 5,000-year-old, again, or at least so they say, 5,000-year-old civilization. And then you got the whole Zep Tepi, which some are claiming goes back 30,000 years. But I'm saying even 30,000 years is that doesn't even scratch the surface of a 300, being 300,000 years old, in terms of being modern human beings, meaning like they were no different than us in terms of, thinking capacity, language, how they interacted with each other, social structures, all that stuff. So because we're only talking the Gregorian calendar in a 2,000 year period that only takes us back to the year one, right? Then you got Rome, and then you got Greece, and then you got Egypt, right? Mesopotamia, all right. And I'm saying you're still just scratching the surface. Like there's a whole aspect of human civilization. Like you go past I don't know what Egypt, Mesopotamia. Personally, I think ancient Egypt is older than Mesopotamia. I don't know why they are like, oh, it's Mesopotamia and cuneiform, and I'm like, but civilization started in Africa, so why don't you start in Africa? I really feel like again that anti-blackness of no, 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 we're going to start it outside of Africa. Because we have to reinforce anti-blackness and white supremacy, and so there's just all this fucking bias, racial bias when you're just trying to get to the bottom of it. You're trying to get to the truth, and then the shit doesn't line up. You say, "Oh, is the out of Africa?" They want to say, "Oh, it's the out of Africa theory." Then they do the DNA test, just like they had that video, that Chinese guy he wanted to argue that that the Chinese had some unique origin story. Everybody wants to have a unique origin story. They want to get as far away from the out of Africa theory, as possible, and then they go and they run the DNA, and it only leads them right back to Africa, right? I mean, it makes sense. I mean, you got gorillas in Africa, right? Hominids, primates, right? Like it makes sense. Like human beings are fucking primates, right? It makes sense that and the oldest bones that they found were like in I think it's like in the the upper part of the Nile, in that region, which is the same region as gorillas, which is on the border of Rwanda, uh, Democratic Republic of Congo, and, in that Lake Victoria area in Uganda, like in that area, right? But in any event, I'm saying, um, you have this massive timeline that you can only go back so far, and then everybody draws a blank. It's just like when we had the arguments about ancient Egypt, and we were talking about, like just. I mean, I'm not an Egyptologist, but it's like the dodging of the clear, uh, um, you know, black African civilization that was ancient Egypt. That I mean, the clear dodging of it, it was just getting underneath my skin. And then you go and you look and you do your little research. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, the hieroglyph for face ends the conversation for me. I'm like, I'm not going to go back and forth. Motherfuckers want to argue about Cleopatra and all these late period Greco-Roman art and statues. Like it's like it's a 5,000-year-old civilization. Why don't you go back further? Keep digging. Go back further. What was the root of this civilization? Man, they want to dodge that all day, right? The Nile flows into the Mediterranean. They want to dodge that, because that would be the natural movement of human migration. They speak an Afro-Asiatic language that started in Africa, right? They want to dodge that. The Sahara was not always a desert. They want to dodge that. It always kills me. You have an out of Africa theory that black people migrated out of Africa, right? And just kind of, moved along the southern coast of the Indian Ocean all the way into Southeast Asia, where you get the Melanesian people and the people of Fiji, the Jawa, the Mani people of Thailand, the Dravidian people, the Australian people, right? So you had the Negritos of the Philippines, right? So you can see that all these people are blackish derivatives, of black people, right? So we can migrate around, out of Africa, but somehow we can't migrate internally within Africa. There's this great wall, called the Sahara Desert, that we magically can't cross because of this term sub-Saharan African, right? But somehow the people that have no melanin at all, oh, they can navigate the Sahara. They can move across the Sahara, but not black people. Who've again had trade long had trade routes across the Sahara. I mean, this was the whole argument of, oh, the black people, they didn't invent the wheel. They didn't have the wheel, which they did have, but the wheel isn't going to do you much good on muddy ground where you have freaking monsoons. You ever see I mean, that was the first thing that happened to the Boers and the Afrikaners when they went to South Africa and they tried to move north into the interior of Africa. Not only were their livestock killed by malaria and tsetse fly, which is sleeping sickness, but also their wagon wheels would get stuck in the mud. And think of a smooth ass wagon wheel on some damn sand dunes. A camel is way more effective, right? It's built for the desert, right? You see this on the carve on the cave paintings. It's sitting there riding a camel and they're hitting the back with a stick, right? But like somehow this just eludes everybody. So it always kills me. We can move around. Excuse me, we can, leave the continent of Africa as black people, but we can't move around internally within Africa, right? Even though people want to talk about the Bantu expansion and all this other, I'm like, you're not making any sense. But anyway, after saying all that, I'm saying, so like this is the part that always like kind of gets me with how people want to believe in religion, and they want to believe in Jesus and Allah and the Quran, and they want to believe in all this. Oh, this holy book says this, and I'm like, and they're running around scrambling, looking for evidence and shit like that. And I'm like, isn't it more fascinating that the Pyramid of Giza exists? Isn't it more fascinating that you have Gobekli Tepe and Pumupuku and Angkor Wat, and that cave that they found that was like carved. It was first, it was like flooded, and it was like there's a cave in China that's like carved, and you can see like they basically like scooped out, just massive amounts of, dirt and rubble and whatnot in order to create this cave. And then, what other place you have? The Ellora Caves, that temple that looks, I think it's called the Kalash, like the Kalash something. I forget what it is. But anyway, the Ellora Caves, if you just type in Ellora Caves, it'll come up. But it's like a big temple that like looks like, shit was just mined out of the ground, right? And nobody knows how this was done. And the size of the blocks, the stone of the pregnant woman in Syria, right? And then they're saying this stone is the same as this stone, and this how somehow this stone was moved several, thousand miles, to this other location, right? So to me, I'm like, okay, so human beings at one point in time had to be way more advanced than what people believe. Not to mention, like, one of the things when people always want to get funky with race and they want to talk about race, and they're like, oh, you got to keep the race is separated and all this other shit, right? When you look at other animals, right? I look at humans like dogs. When you look at other animals, right, they get isolated for a period of time and then they turn into completely different species. And people try to treat race like it's a different species, and it's just not the case, right? Because you looking at like example, like you take a what is it a horse and a donkey, and then you make a mule, and a mule is infertile. But you can take any combination of human beings on the planet and mix them and mingle them, and they will still produce offspring, which tells me that human beings have not been separated as long as people would like to believe, right? So there's been migrations, people move around, people were sailing. It's like India had I don't know if you want to call it a king or a shah or whatever, like Murtaza the second. Go look up Murtaza the second. I think it's Murtaza the second, right? Let me double check. Let me type in Murtaza the second. Is it Murtaza the second? Yeah, Murtaza Nizam Shah the second, right? Black dude, right? So like people were moving around, they were traveling, but like people want to have like these cookie cutters, like the same way that people were flipping about uh freaking Assassin's Creed and cultural appropriation, and talking about this supposed samurai or sword bearer Yasuke, and just freaking out, right? That somehow the world was just this place of bins where people were in particular locations, and that was it. Like even with the Vikings, what I mean, that like there was I don't know, somebody found a piece of jewelry that had Arabic words on it, that was a Viking ring. Yeah, because the Vikings were going in, capturing Slavs, and then bringing them into the Muslim world and selling them. Okay, that's white on white slavery. That's what the Vikings were doing. They were going all the way to the Middle East, and they were selling Slavic slaves that they would get, from the Balkans and shit like that. That's what they were doing. Go look it up if you think I'm full of shit. What I mean? So, people have these ideas based off of Hollywood and movies about human history and, how isolated they think people or societies were. And I'm like, they weren't. And you can't seem to get this out of people's mind. Like and especially with the white people, they're some of the worst culprits. They're like, that's preposterous. I mean, they just cannot handle a world where like black people were first, or that Europeans got their knowledge from black people. Oh, they can't handle this shit. They can't handle the shit. The court, let them tell it. Um, the the world has always been, you know, basically, from what, the 1500s, till now. Like that's what the world has been, where Europeans were the apex, and everybody else was just nothing, and Europeans brought the Enlightenment. And again, you can go back and read from Europeans themselves, because the Greeks and the Romans considered Northern and Western Europeans to be barbarians and savage, and they considered the Africans to be civilized, right? But see, this is when you're trying to facilitate white supremacy, right? And you're trying to, you're gonna go through the racial iconoclasm, and you're gonna remove all of those medieval depictions of black people as royalty or nobility or in positions of being respected. um and you're also going to diminish the influence of anybody other than yourself. And I think much of this happened in 1492, when they kicked the Moors out of Europe and they kicked the Jews out of Europe, and they restructured how they wanted to represent themselves and represent their history, right? Which to some degree is understandable, right? But because they controlled the narrative for so long, right? Now, people believe, like in other words, there has to be an undoing of the damage that white supremacy has done to actual history. Like like they changed the history in order to justify and maintain their position, their hegemony, and the system of white supremacy. And so now when you dive into archaeology, it's just tainted. The ancient Egypt's history is just tainted. Even this whole thing with Gobekli Tepe, like now they're questioning whether that Gobekli Tepe has anything to do with Noah's Ark, because it's like shrines to different animals and things like that. And then you have the Turkish government that, think about it, Turkey's a Muslim country, and then here you have something that might verify something that was in the Bible. They don't want that. They don't, a stuff for Allah, right? They don't want that shit. Like, oh hell no. Hell no. We want stuff that verifies and reinforces Islam, not Christianity, or even, the some of the stories. And then that's not to say that the Bible is accurate. The Bible is a compilation of books. The Bible is not the original text. There's things that came. I mean, again, you're talking 300,000-year-old modern human beings, and then somehow the end all be all is what was written in the last 2,000 years, like as though there was nothing before that, right? Like how they found like the story of Gilgamesh in Sumerian text, right? But somehow, or like having these stories like retold. It's the same way that nobody wants to tell, or excuse me, the Hollywood won't be creative like Ryan Coogler and give us original movies. No, 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 no. Let's tell the Little Red Riding Hood in a different way. Let's tell the story of Hansel and Gretel in a different way. Let's race swap and change the characters around and make it more diverse so we have a broader audience. Like, let's do that because we own the IP and we don't want to take the risk of having writers and just taking the risk with a new story. I mean, that's just crazy. Like when my generation, we complain about this, because like I mean the amount of movies coming up, freaking Maximum Overdrive, Gremlins, E.T., Critters, Arachnophobia, Honey I Shrunk the Kids. I mean, my goodness, if you grew up in the 90s, Batteries Not Included, Ghostbusters. I mean, the shit just went on and on and on. RoboCop. Damn, from the 80s to like like what, the year 2000. I mean, we had awesome awesome, awesome freaking movies growing up. I mean, it was just like everything was just a blockbuster, you know? But now it's like, oh, how many times can I retell the same fucking story over and over and over again? How many Transformers movies can we have, right? How many Avengers movies can we have, right? Which the superhero thing is fine, but I'm like, there just really seems to be a lack of creativity and whatnot. But I'm saying kind of the same thing when you look at, the Bible, and, they're just retelling other stories that already existed. They're it's like a patchwork quilt of, well, we're going to take a little bit of this and a little bit of that and da 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 da. Okay, and this is the last 2,000 years, and we're going to call it good. And it's like, no, no, you got that story. That story might have been, 10,000 years old, but they don't. They're just getting bits and pieces of it. It's like when you see these maps that Bright Insight talks about with the that clearly depict Antarctica. But you're not supposed to know about Antarctica. Antarctica wasn't discovered until like the 1800s or something like that, right? So how did you know that that landmass was there? And again, a lot of this revolves around the assumption that Europeans discovered everything. But the the main reason I wanted to like make this video is, oh yeah, I mean, getting back to the you know the the ancient civilization stuff. I'm like, that shit's right in front of you. Like, you can see it. I can Google all type of images. Pinterest is probably the best to get many of this stuff from. Like, if you really want to go down a rabbit hole, and you just look at some of the images on Pinterest, and you'll be like, yo, ain't no way, bro. Ain't no way, ain't nobody carved that shit. Like, there's no way you can carve that. You know what I mean? Like, even with, who's the other guy, Pravin something, Indian dude. Like, when you like, he'll show the temples, and they got the little. He'll take like a piece of straw or string, and then run it through. The back of this, like the back of the statue, like it's actually like carved in the back. And it's like, yo, you can't carve that. Like, that shit's like 3D printed. Like, how the hell, do you do some shit like that? Right? And if you make a mistake, like if you break the stone, then the whole thing is done, right? If you mess it up, right? And you see some of that, like in Egypt, like you see like the stones with their, where they started to cut, and then like the angle, like it was too great or too small, and you can see like where it's not perfectly straight, and then they gave up on the rock, and then they just went somewhere else, or they like the core drills. You see all this shit, right? But here's where the racism comes in, right? And this is all that, we was Kangs, bullshit, right? And this trying to, this idea of black people trying to appropriate other people's culture, right? But if black people were the first people, the original people that spawned everybody else, why wouldn't the origins of these civilizations be black? And I'm saying, I'm talking about the earliest ones, right? I'm not talking about later periods when other groups had already evolved, and at that point you can't really tie them, back to Africa. But in particularly, like when I'm looking at Southeast Asia, and they're talking about the Khmer Rouge, and they call them the Mon Khmer, and which is like the ones who came before or something like that, the earliest ones. And I'm looking at I was watching a couple videos. I'm looking at some of the comments, and there's certain things that I'll see that raise eyebrows, like when I'm looking at stuff. Like, why the fuck does Buddha have nappy hair, bro? No Asians have freaking, like, and they always depict it. Whether you want to talk about the way that the Persians depicted black people, the way that the Europeans depicted black people on statues, or even in Southeast Asia, like, how do you, if you were going to make nappy hair in stone, like, how would you make nappy hair in stone? Like, how would you depict that, right? right? It's always the same. It's curly. It's always the same, but like it's depicted a certain way whenever they put it in stone, right? And I've seen other pictures of Buddha where Buddha's, you got Buddha with long hair, I've seen Buddha with straight hair, I've seen Buddha with a bald head. Like Buddha like changes. Like there's like the young Buddha, and then there's like the fit Buddha, and then there's like the fat Buddha. I'm assuming the fat Buddha is like right like when he was older before he died or whatever. But in any event, I'm like, I still want to know why Buddha got nappy hair. And then going to, like uh, one of the things that I look at is I look at the Khmer, right? The Khmer, not the Khmer Rouge, but the Khmer people in Cambodia and Angkor Wat. Now, there's a video where a brother, he goes and interviews, the Khmer people at some temple, and he's like, what did the people look like? And I saw another video, and there's a white woman, and the depiction on one of the temples that are there is, of an individual with curly hair, and he's got a mustache, right? Now she said, he had a pointy nose. Again, I hate this I all black people have flat noses. All black people got a KRS-One nose. That's not true. That's just simply not true. And again, the black people who left and went into Southeast Asia most likely were from the eastern part of Africa, not the western part of Africa. We can argue that in the western part of Africa, that's where you get, the Olmecs and the Olmec heads and the Olmec statues, right? Again, you got a 300,000-year-old timeline, to just, you know, fill in the blank of what went on, right? And then again, you got all these people running around. Oh, look at the stones with the knobs on it. Oh, look at the this looks similar to this structure in this country and that country and this country, and it looks like at one point there was a global civilization. And I'm saying, who would have been the first people to bring about that global civilization? It probably would have been black people. Like the crazy thing is like the people don't even want to go with the. It probably would have been black people because black people are ancient. The Greeks and the Romans called black people as such, ancient. But yet somehow, and again, I know this fucks with a lot of things. It fucks with like that whole white Jesus and the white Adam and Eve and the white Garden in Eden and there's so much racist bullshit thanks to the system of white supremacy that they put out there that now you can't even have a civil discussion about race and history, right? You can't even have a civil discussion about it. Everything is that's preposterous. Everything is that's preposterous. No, what's preposterous are a group of people whose genetic background didn't even show up until about 45 to 55,000 years ago. 55,000 years ago, they say that the Jawa were already over there, on the eastern side of freaking India, right? On in Sentinel Island, North Sentinel Island, right? Freaking 6,000 years ago, the genes for blue eyes or the recessive genes for blue eyes popped up, which are basically melanin genes turned off. I mean, that's what white people essentially are. That's what everybody else is. Take a black person and then start turning genes off. They don't like none of these other people have any new shit. Like black people literally have all of the DNA to make all other groups. It doesn't work in the reverse. But yet, oh, that's preposterous. Just I mean, it's so irritating. It's so annoying. But anyway, I'm getting away from the Angkor Wat, and I wanted to it'd probably take up too much space for me to sit there and grab all the clips I want and want the people saying this. There's a documentary in the 1970s because one of the things that the guy said in this other clip, and I'll put the links in the description box, but he was talking about how, he was like, yeah, Pol Pot killed a lot of the black people, and a lot of them fled to Thailand, during the Khmer Rouge, which was, basically Pol Pot was like this communist guy, and he was ruling with an iron fist and wanted to get rid of all the educated and smart people. And if you wore glasses, he would kill you and shit like that. The killing fields in Cambodia, real fucked up shit, right? And there's a video, and it shows this Asian guy, right? It doesn't look like any of the Asian guys. Basically, that the Khmer Rouge, they attacked him and they tried to like slit his throat, and he had bandages around his neck, and he's laying on the bed, and he's much darker than any of the other Asian people in this image. Now, the other Cambodian guy, he basically says that, that he points out the Communist Party, how they were bringing in like the Chinese girls and, trying to basically breed out, the original Khmer. And you see a lot of this in not just with what the Chinese specifically were doing, but even long before that, you had the Chinese Neolithic farmers that moved into the Southeast Asia and then mixed with some of um, the Melanesian populations, right? Same thing with the Dravidians, and why you have two distinct populations in India. You have the Tamil speaking people, the Telugu speaking people, and then you have, the Aryan, steppe Hindu speaking people. And you should look at some of the debates, the back and forth, and there is one Indian guy in particular. He's like a PhD, and he just like, no, we came from Africa. That's where we came from. Speaking on the Dravidian, but again, the Dravidians. But there's all that anti-blackness and all that, right? And I'm saying it all depends on how far back you want to go, like where you have those that mixed with the Neanderthals after they left Africa, because there were other hominid groups. You had the Denisovans, in Southeast Asia, which is another population that mixed with the modern human beings, and some of the Melanesians and Southeast Asians, have the markers for Denisovans. I guess you would call them the Neanderthal, of Southeast Asia. But I'm saying, um, there's enough talk about like things like the original Chimera being dark skinned, and then the fact that, again, you see this in Southeast Asia. You see the Melanesians, you see the people of Fiji, you see the Jarawa, you see the Dravidians, you see the Australians, you see the Mani people of Thailand, you see the Negritos, right? And you could see that, like, yeah, obviously it's some of them mixed with the Asian, because you can see a little bit of the Asian, and you can see, that they're um, blackish, right, or derived from blackish. It's always funny to me is how everybody knows what a nigga looks like until we get to the ancient world. When we get to the ancient world, oh no, they're not black. Black don't mean Africa. I seen comments like that. Black don't mean Africa. There is no Mullerian mimicry. Human beings don't have Mullerian mimicry. Like Mullerian mimicry is like what you see with like a snake that's trying to imitate a poisonous snake, but he's not poisonous, or like a carpenter bee, which doesn't have a stinger and tries to mimic looking like a bee so that other animals don't fuck with it. That type of shit. Melanin is not a Mullerian mimicry type feature. If you have light skin, it's because your melanocytes have essentially been turned off. So they try to play all these games, and we can't even get a real timeline. Well, how old is this? Oh, we don't know. It's like even with this, Cambodian statues, you see the big lips, you see the lip line, you see the fat noses, You know what I mean? It's like, could they be, blackish, originated from, the first wave of black Africans that left Africa? Did they have any relationship to ancient Kemet? Who knows? I'm just posing the question. I'm like, maybe it's a possibility, you know. But you get these racists that are like, absolutely, that's preposterous. Absolutely not. You know what I mean? Like it's so irritating, and they pop up in all these videos, and then you have the people who, um, who, are like the people who are currently there, right? And so they feel some type of way because they're like, this is our civilization and blah 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 blah. I'm like, I'm not saying that it's not, but I'm saying, um, how far back do you want to go? Because the reality is there was a point in time in human civilization in the world where when black people left Africa, like there was nobody else. Like they walked into lands that were basically either empty or had a bunch of, the like the Neanderthal type, right? That eventually, obviously, modern humans freaking eradicated them or wiped them out, or maybe it was climate change or whatever, or whatever. I'm not big on, the ancient cataclysm. I think there's a space for, what that what's his name, Mr. Hancock talks about, right, on Joe Rogan, and you see his clips coming up and whatnot. I'm not huge on that, but I'm also not. I don't have a closed mind to it either. I want to know why Pumupuku stones look like somebody set off a bomb and all the pieces are all over the fucking place, right? I mean, like most of this stuff, seriously speaking, that people really want to like look up, archaeologically look up, is it's under the ocean. I remember when they had that tsunami. When was that tsunami in Southeast Asia? What was it, like 2005, 2006? When was that? When was that tsunami? Or was it like 2013, 14, something like that? Anyway, I remember they had the tsunami in Southeast Asia, and they found the city of Dwarka, which is it's on the, I think it's on the western coast of India, and it was like basically a mythological city, right? Because you got to, the sea levels have risen, since, I don't know, the Younger Dryas and all that other shit, right? And most cities are going to be where, like, look at the fact that like New York, every time there's like a storm surge, like New York gets flooded. Miami's going to be underwater in like, I don't know, what, 200 years, something like that, maybe 100 years, who knows, right? But Florida, it just it's not, it's sinking. It's not going to be there. So so what was I saying? Why I'm losing my train of thought? So during the tsunami, if y'all don't know, like when there's a tsunami, one of the key features of a tsunami, like when a tsunami is coming, the because the wave is moving forward and it's cresting, the water like goes backwards to feed into, this tsunami wave. And so where the beach typically starts, it goes way back into like pulls the beach, the edge of the beach or where the water is, pulls it way back. You should see the shit. Like it looks crazy, right? If you looked at some of those images of when they had the when was that? Hold on, when was the? Let me see if I can find it. Tsunami. I want to know what year that was. Tsunami, Southeast Asia. When was it? When was that? When was the tsunami? 2004. So I was right the first time. Indian Ocean earthquake. Yeah, 2004. And let me say Asian. Let me type in Dwarka. What is the story of Dwarka? Did a tsunami hit Dwarka and submerge it in the sea? What is this at? Tsunami, Southeast Asia, retrospective analysis. Da, 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 da. Remembering the first tsunami. Wait, let me type in city of Dwarka found. Because what people saw is they saw structures in the ocean when the Reports from the marine archaeology studies suggest that the ancient city of Dwarka, located in the western coast of India, may have been submerged due to a large tsunami, possibly 3000 BCE. Evidence, archaeological findings, the Gulf Cambay, off the coast of modern day Dwarka, have revealed submerged city remains, including stone streets, pillars, irrigation systems. These findings align with the description in ancient texts like the Mahabharata, right? Possible tsunami cause, da 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 da. Carbon dating of artifacts found at the Dwarka site indicates an age of around 7,000 to 9,500 years, with some studies suggesting that the city submerged around 5,000 years ago. You know what I'm saying? Like, this shit is old. That's as old as Egypt. That's older, than what is claimed to be, ancient Egyptian civilization. 9,500, that's going to put you in, I believe, a wet Sahara. Obviously much wetter than it is right now. Because I think those caves in the lower part of Libya that have, where there's like cave paintings, I think those are about 9,500 years old. So I'm just saying, like, there was a point in time where nobody else was here. You know what I mean? Like, if we go back, I don't know, fucking, 70,000 years, there were no Europeans. There were no white people. They didn't exist. There were no blue eyes. Blue eyes only came to be about 6,000 years ago, right? You go back 10,000 years ago, modern humans were walking around, and so were woolly mammoths, right? I forget when the last, let me see, when did the last saber-toothed tiger die? And I'm saying with the so-called ancient cataclysm, like there had to be a cataclysm, because where did all the freaking megafauna go in North America? The last saber-toothed tiger, saber-toothed cats, specifically Smilodon, went extinct around 10,000 years ago. So we were here. Human beings were here 10,000 years ago, right? Imagine that shit. Imagine, you walk outside and shit, and you fucking saber-toothed tiger look at you in the face, trying to ambush your ass and shit. Imagine that shit. Big ass fucking saber-toothed tiger, and whatever other animals were around, at that time. People talking about dire wolves and shit like that. This shit's crazy. Now human beings want to play God, and I saw that shit where they were talking about we mixed this and we're trying to make a dire wolf, trying to bring shit back. They're talking about bringing back a woolly mammoth. I guarantee they already have. I guarantee they're doing that shit in Antarctica. It's like, why are y'all down there so much, right? They got a whole facility, looking like Resident Evil down there in Antarctica, or in the ocean somewhere in international waters where they can do whatever the fuck they want to do. I think what did China do? There was something that China did with CRISPR, because China don't give a fuck. China will sit there and be like, what if we splice a human genome with, that of a gorilla? Like, just trying to figure out how to come up with some bullshit. I wouldn't be surprised. But anyway, I'm just saying, it's just irritating, because it's like, if everything, and I'm not even saying this from an arrogant standpoint. I'm saying it's like, if everything started with black people, why is it so difficult for people to comprehend that, this pre-diluvian period, might have had a significant black African input? Why does that go over people's heads? And again, you sit there and you say, okay, well, how far back can you go? And they're like, oh, well, we can only go back, about 5,000 years. After that, we don't really know what's going on. Like even like when they discovered Göbekli Tepe, which is supposedly 12,500 years old, they were fucked up about that. They were like, impossible, impossible. I'm like, oh my god, that's preposterous. And so they had to even fight over that. They were fighting about that shit. I'm like, and that wasn't even talking about fucking race. That was just saying, hey, this is way more ancient than this 5,000-year-old or 6,000-year-old timeline that everybody's been running with, right? And you got to think about like all the people that like pisses off, like all that undermines, right? Especially the Bible thumpers, especially the church and the Vatican. I remember when they had something with them, they were talking about this new telescope that they put up there, and they were looking at, looking into space, and the Vatican got concerned. Let me see, Vatican concerned about telescope. Let's see what it says. Vatican concerned about telescope. The Vatican is concerned about telescopes specifically in context to the Vatican observation. What is this? No. Where's the one? Science and Vatican has a long history of interest in astronomy dating back to reform. No, this isn't what I'm looking for. Why the Vatican has a giant research telescope. Where's this news article at? Hold on, let me see if I can find it real quick. Because I remember when Cap hit me up about finding God in the cosmos interview with the Vatican. Yeah, they want to know. They want to know what the hell you see. A new telescope is changing ideas about how the universe began. Speakers say, see, like when you mix, when you have science basically finding answers to shit, and then you have religious organizations like the Catholic Church or Christianity. You know what I mean? They want to know what they want to be the first ones to know what the hell's going on, because they want to know whether they got to change their narrative or not. Whether they got to change their story or not, which only reinforces just how much bullshit it is, right? All that. Oh, the Earth was made in 7 days, and you got science telling you that the Earth is however many billions of years old. What is it, like 4 billion years old or something? Like, how old is the Earth? Let me see how old the Earth is. How old is the Earth? Let's see. How old is the Earth? Come on. Where's the give me an answer. 4.5 billion years old. You know what I'm saying? That fucks with shit. That fucks with shit. Talking about the Garden of Eden and Jesus, and then you gotta talk about these dinosaur bones, right? That undermines, this fairy tale of a story, that they want to tell people. But when it comes to human beings, and it comes to humanity, when it comes to maybe shit got wiped out, there was a great reset. Everybody got blasted back into the Stone Ages. I mean, that's like, I remember I had somebody was asking me, oh, how come Africans aren't advanced today if they were so advanced in ancient times? Like, motherfucker, do you know how to fix a car? Because I guarantee you, if there was a nuclear war and there was nuclear fallout and the pumps stop and the gas stations, stop pumping gas, and cars were just abandoned on the street, and it's looking like The Last of Us out this bitch, I guarantee you that within one generation, you wouldn't have anybody who knows how the car works. Motherfuckers be telling stories like, my grandfather said that those moved at one time. You know what I mean? Like, that's what they would be saying. So the idea that knowledge can't be lost, that's insane. Hell, most of this stuff. I mean, if you can't, if the power grid goes down and you can't charge your phone is a brick. If your grandchild picked up a phone in a post-apocalyptic world, they wouldn't know what it is. They wouldn't even know that it even turns on. It would just be a black screen, and they would be like, "Yeah, we don't know what they are. There's tons of them, and why do they have these 3 circles on the back? We don't even know what they do." right? They couldn't even imagine that it was it was a touch screen. There's no buttons, there's no nothing. But why are there so many of these things? Then they be trying to cut it open and trying to figure out what it is and what's inside of it and everything. They wouldn't have a clue. It's, like even in what's that other place in Budapest? They got that place in Budapest. They got the underground and they got all like they have like where they kept the animals and the cows and there's a ventilation system and all that shit. I'm like, okay, either you were hiding from like the Mongol hordes or there was some shit in the atmosphere where y'all couldn't go outside. You know what I mean? And you were underground and that was how you kept yourself safe. And you just hunkered down for, I don't know, maybe what, a generation or two or 6 months, right? What were you hiding from, right? That's the scary part, right? Like, what were you hiding from? Or what were you, was it a giant solar flare? What's the deal? Right? So I'm just saying, it's irritating because I try to keep an open mind to shit. You know what I mean? I see this stuff and I'm like, okay, we're ancient. We're this old. Okay, left Africa. We went to the other parts of the world. Okay. And then, you look at the statues, you're looking at the images. And I'm not saying you couldn't have had two people that came together, they bumped into each other or whatever. But it depends on like what period are we talking about? Are we talking about before black people, started branching off and turning into other races of people? Or are we talking about later periods where the first wave of black people branched off into other races of people, and then they were met by the second wave of black people, or the third wave, or the fifth wave of black people out of Africa? Because there were several migrations out of Africa. It wasn't just one. Starting with like the Tufians and going into, the Melanesians and the first Southeast Asians. The first Southeast Asians, were black. So, it's just irritating at how you can't even have a simple, conversation or get to understand, what the history is or what's going on without people getting all type of butt hurt. And then they want to fuss and they want to cry and they want to, that's preposterous, and especially when you're talking about black people. I don't see that type of shit when people start talking about white folks or talking about other folks. You know what I mean? Just when it comes to black people, absolutely not. I'm like, okay, with that big ass nose statue that you got in the background, but whatever. Anyway, that's my video. SWP out. Don't forget to comment, share, like, and subscribe.
On the scene, diamond blingy, whole screen. Check a boy, Louis V. I'm so fresh and so clean. Stuff them bands in my jeans, snap them 30s in them things. Pull the trigger, let it sing. Then go smoke a Russian cream.
Move. Hold on.
Yeah.
Hello?
Where you at?
Where we at? Oh, you want to know where I'm at? We